Hey, everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co host, Alex Ashlow. This week, the MAGA murder budget has passed the House. Let's talk about how to go on offense and define it to voters. I'm going to I'm going to call BS a lot on Trump. We all have to. The numbers are really staggering that Alex and I are looking at. And one of the most staggering numbers of all are how little the American people know about the damage that's coming. And it's why we have to call Trump out, call this MAGA murder budget what it is, and repeat, repeat. Alex, where should we get started?
Oh man. Well, let's talk about the budget, man. As we're recording this, I think overnight or late last night, the House passed Trump's budget. I think I know where you're going to go with this, but this is like a massive thing for Democrats to campaign
Yeah,
on,
well,
right?
first of all, stop calling it Trump's budget. Call it Trump's MAGA murder budget. That's step one, because that's what it is. But where did you want to go? I'm sorry.
No, no, that's what I was teeing you up. You fell right into the trap, my friend. It's the big beautiful killer bill, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, people are going to die because of what they are doing. And I think, we've got to start budget reconciliation bill. No, this is the MAGA murder budget. That's how we have to brand it, should brand it. And we have to call this stuff what it is. One of the things that's going on, I don't know if you saw this, Alex, but one of our problems is that no one is hearing about Medicaid cuts. I mean, talk about the millions of people whose lives will be really impacted because of hospitals shutting down, particularly rural hospitals shutting down, seniors, children, that's lives will be put at risk because of the cuts to Medicaid. And here's just one example from polling, Navigator Research polling. Just 27% of Americans have heard a lot about Congress proposing cuts to Medicaid. And that's largely driven by, get this, by 39% of Democrats here have said they've heard a lot about it. I mean, 61%
So
of
so
Democrats.
basically only Democrats have heard of this.
Well, no, nobody's heard about it. 61% of Democrats haven't heard about it. If only 39% of Democrats say they've heard a lot about Congress proposing cuts to Medicaid, you already have 61% of Democrats not hearing about it. Only 21% of independents say they've heard about the cuts, and 16% of Republicans say they've heard a lot about the proposed cuts. So you compare that, by the way. I mean, this is how, we've got to get loud about stuff like this. And we have, here's so to compare that number with the 63% of Americans who say they've heard a lot about tariffs. Now, this is something, first of all, again, remember, a very small number, 27% of Americans have heard a lot about the Medicare cuts. But what planet are you on when you're 63? So the 37% who have not heard about tariffs somehow since Liberation Day to today is a pretty
Are they
amazing
like
stat
going
in
to the
itself.
grocery store, going to the store and just seeing that like stuff's more expensive and just
Well,
shaking their heads and going about their like how are you not
that's what I
like
mean. So 63% of Americans say they've heard a lot about tariffs. So, I'm just saying that's almost triple the number of heard about Medicaid cuts, but it also tells you how much you have to repeat this stuff over and over again. But by the way, that's something MAGA Trump get. And so MAGA murder budget, Medicaid cuts, children, seniors, all being harmed, hospitals, rural hospitals shutting down, no health care for the poorest, the poorest and the people who need it the most, right? Okay, I mean that's what I'm saying. And so, here's another one. Even 43% say they've heard a lot about the Pope Leo, the new Pope. So, which is almost twice what the number of people have heard about Medicaid cuts. Same thing. I don't know how. I mean, that just shows you how few people are paying, not watching the news, not reading newspapers to
there's an
get through.
assumption that Democrats make, right? And by Democrats, I
Right.
mean people in politics make, that like people are caught up on this stuff and
Oh yeah.
people see it and they say, "Oh yeah, this is bad. I'm going to vote against it." It's like there's this there's this breaks in the causal chain that it just really bugs me that, by the way, this is why Trump repeats stuff. This is why MAGA
Right.
repeats stuff.
Exactly.
They
That's
repeat
what.
it. They make it easy for people that don't spend their day refreshing Politico and CNN and doing their own
It,
research and all that other, like, it boggles my mind that we're this bad at this, Joe.
yeah. No, and that's what it is. I mean, well, I'm sure. Like, okay, we know that Pope Leo, sort of has taken Trump on about immigration, but that's what I'm saying. Only 43% of people even know heard something about the new pope at all. So, you can't assume anybody knows any of this stuff. And on the important stuff, like the Trump murder, MAGA murder budget, we have to repeat that phrase over and over again when we talk about the people who are being hurt. You know, in the Navigator, the case against, they said, because they were getting into some of the wording and things that we should be talking about, the case against the GOP tax plan is stronger if you acknowledge the current tax system is broken first. And and that's one of the things I do think when you talk about later on about the campaign manager hat, is one of the things Democrats and people who want to restore or repair the damage that Trump's doing to democracy and to departments is to not defend the status quo, is to acknowledge that the tax system is broken, but you're not going to, it's not going to be fixed by providing a huge tax cut for billionaires and the wealthy and cutting Medicaid that has bipartisan support, and is going to have huge consequences on low income Americans, seniors, and children. Now, when I say bipartisan support, it was off the charts. Even Republicans are in the 60% support of Medicaid. And by the way, the interesting thing is, remember all these things that no one knows about and no one's heard about. People know about Medicaid and they know who benefits from it. They know low income Americans, seniors, and children are the beneficiaries of it, and they're for it, including well into the 60 percentile of Republicans. So, the most important is the MAGA murder budget, is cutting billions and billions from Medicaid and putting low-income American seniors and kids at risk and their lives at risk, and will result in shutting down over 300 rural hospitals. And it's a death sentence for many people. Not just this, but many parts of this bill and what they're cutting is going that people will be hurt. Some people will die because of what they're doing. And all, by the way, for a massive, a big beneficial tax cut to wealthier Americans, people. Anyway, so I just think that's some of the
Yeah,
things we need to be stressing.
if we can get back to like the you versus them, and we saw this last year. I mean, it's never, Democrats never really got this to break through, but the whole message that Trump and this cabal of billionaires, insurance companies, big pharma, whatever, they're screwing you, they
Right.
versus you,
Yeah,
and
it's
all these, right,
tax cuts for them,
not
uh,
for you.
not for you.
And that's a simple, like, once you get
Well,
there and you start framing it that way, it's just so much simpler to understand than this happened in reconciliation and this number of billion and this. It's no. And by the way, and you got to this looking at some of these numbers, it's crazy how much this completely flips the support. People support tax cuts. That's not a surprise, right? It's right now, it's like +3. It's 42-39. But if you then say the tax cuts are helping the rich and not you, it goes like 27 points underwater. It's a 30-point swing. And
yeah,
like,
57% oppose it, 27 points support it. And you hear that message, when you hear that message that these cuts help the rich, 59% of independents and a quarter of Republicans oppose the plan. Now, before that, when it's just, as you said, Alex, when it's just Hey, how do you feel about tax cuts? Of course, everybody wants
Right.
tax
Right.
cuts, but you have to explain to people and again repeat out, over and over again. It's a tax cut for the rich at your expense, at cutting your health care or the ability of Medicaid cuts for seniors, children, low income Americans making less than 100,000 per year are more likely to oppose tax cuts for those who are already rich. It's like 59% if you're making less than 100 a year. While those making over 100,000 a year, big surprise here, folks, are divided. 46% support a tax cut for the wealthy and 47%
Yep. Just a
oppose it.
shock.
Now, no, but by the way, who are the 47% who still oppose it, even though they now know it's a tax cut for the rich? And even though they're doing really well, I suspect it's people who have heard about the Medicaid cuts that will hurt low income Americans, seniors, and children, and they give a shit. And so they oppose it. That's why you got to keep making that case because I think even a lot of the people who make over $100,000 a year who have not heard much about the Medicaid cuts, if they knew that this was the MAGA murder bill and why people's lives were being put at risk for a big tax cut for the wealthy, I think the numbers will even grow bigger. That's why we have to keep at it. And as you said, Trump, MAGA, they know why and how often they repeat things, how they keep it simple, stupid. And I do mean keep it simple, stupid. And and they get through to people who are just not paying much attention.
I mean, here's the number I go back to. The 27% of Americans have heard a lot about the Medicaid cuts. What we have seen so far in the first like 4 months here, and I can't believe we're now in 4 months territory, is Trump and Musk and Doge and everybody have done a really good job picking high profile public fights. I'm thinking like
Yeah.
sending stormtroopers into US aid, picking, making the fight about why we're giving $6 million to support condoms in country X in Africa or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah. And now they're
And they're
doing
picking
the,
these big, easy ones to say, obviously, right? And they got, and the media fell for it. They're getting a ton of coverage. And all of a sudden, we get stuck into should we cut US aid or not? Rather than talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are coming out of Medicaid and what that means. And,
well, it's
but
also why they did the hearings at 1 a.m. in the morning. Like you said, they're
right.
really good at getting attention. And then all of a sudden, no, it's just dead of night. Dead of night, let's pass the killer budget.
Yeah. I mean, your point, we do have to call it out. I do think this is also part of a larger point in getting to where we are in the economy. It's not just the Medicaid cuts. But you start thinking about all the BS that they spewed for months, for years, really, since he went down the damn escalator 10 years ago, right? And I know we were talking about this when we were getting this show ready, but we were looking at some of his promises. Like he
Well,
promised to
the,
slash the deficit, all
but,
that
but
stuff.
no, but the reason that stuff matters is because what they're promising now. They're promising $3.7 trillion in a budget that's going to blow the deficit up by $3.7 billion and claiming that it's gonna solve deficit problem, all that stuff. In other words, like somehow you're gonna cut basically $1 trillion that hurt people, pass a budget that makes tax cuts, for the wealthy, and then and even just about every independent, look at the bill that they've passed. It's got to go to the Senate, and that's going to change some more. But every single independent source that's looked at this says at least a $3.74 trillion add to the deficit. Now, the reason you want to then go back and look at what has he said before is he said, starting on day one, we'll end inflation and make America affordable again to bring down the prices of all goods. That's a direct
He hasn't.
quote. Didn't happen.
Yep.
Prices will come down. You just watch. They'll come down and they'll come down fast, not only with insurance, but with everything. Okay.
I
But
have just
then,
been watching.
No, but here's the thing. Let's just look at the first 100 days. Okay. They do the Doge stuff. They claim they've, cut, fired, whatever, cut, saved $190 billion of spending. But the problem is there's these hard facts. Like the Treasury Department reports daily what's spending, where we're at. So despite Trump's, promises of in their reporting of how much Doge has saved us all, the U.S. spent more than $200 billion more in the first 100 days of Trump's presidency than we did last year. In other words, yeah, they're creating all this havoc. They're firing people. They're shutting down whole departments. They're lying about how much they, that has helped trim any spending because somehow, with all those firings, with everything that they've done, we actually spent $200 billion more in his first 100 days. This is a guy who promised to eliminate the debt last time when he claimed in 2016 that when he got in, he would eliminate the debt within 8 years. And before he left office, he had added
Yeah,
nearly
eight
8
eight
trillion
trillion
to,
more.
to the deficit and increased the deficit by 50%. Not nowhere in that first 4 years did he cut it by a half. He wanted to eliminate. You can't blame Joe Biden for this. It wasn't like, he. So when you look at the bullshit, when you look at what this really is, it's not a budget reconciliation. It's a it's a budget of violence. I mean, literally of cruelty. I'd put it that. It's a budget of cruelty. It's a MAGA murder budget. It's all about hurting. And a lot of this, by the way, is going to hurt a lot of people who supported Donald Trump. I mean, rural communities. When you think about the rural hospitals, the 300 rural hospitals that are likely to have to shut down
Yeah,
because of the
they're not
loss
in
of.
New York City and
No, they're
Chicago
not.
and LA.
They're out there. And what's the devastation economically that will occur because of this? These hospitals are often the heartbeat of the community. I mean, in terms of the number of doctors, nurses, cafeteria staff. I mean, all those people who work in a rural hospital who will be out of jobs when it goes down, when the hospital shuts down, who have to find, there's not going to be another hospital opening up. So they have to leave. The number of stores in main streets of little towns are going to go, have less people living in the neighborhood, in the community, in the town. So all this is it's going to have a ripple effect that of all things punishes the very people who supported Trump because they believed him when he said he would bring prices down, that he was not going to touch things like, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, not no. And now it's all in the guise of fraud and abuse, but who the fraudsters are all evidently rural communities, senior citizens, low income people, of course, and children. That's where the fraud is going to get found,
I
evidently,
mean,
when they make all these cuts.
just you think about what they claim so far, and just a few fun numbers that CBS News had a good, and we'll link this in our show notes because they've compiled all that Treasury data. Doge says it's 160 billion, 190 billion. At most, it's probably at 80. But if you start really looking at that number, it's CBS, and I'm just read you quote, the savings is less than half a percentage point of the debt. It's like a family with $10,000 in credit card balances paying it down by $50. Like that's a
Yeah.
real number that I think people understand. Which, by the way, now
No,
you get why Trump is now, rather than making the promises, he's saying, "Be cool," in
yeah.
in all caps.
Well,
That's his actual post.
yeah. Well, that gets back to the whole claim of all that, even the savings of 0.5% of less than half a percent of the debt. Yeah, but then you go back and you also look at the report that says the Trump regime has already spent 200 billion more than at this point last year, which means okay, even if you take them at their word, give them their 180 and that they spent 100 200 billion more than last year. So what we're still plus 20 billion. In other words, there's no all of it, it's not That's what I mean about it's not even about the numbers. It's not about the money. It's about all those people that got fired, that are now courts are saying, no, you got to hire them back. Whole departments, whole research arms at NIH that were looking at cancer and finding, looking for cures that were shut down. All for what? For what? A net plus 20? Even after you did all that and created all that harm and disruption and chaos, all you got to show for it is you actually spent more than you cut. And now they're saying the same thing. That's my point. Okay, so now, no, now we're going to do, 3.7 trillion, not add 200 billion, but 3.7 trillion to the deficit. And don't worry, you're right. Just trust us. Be cool. Everything is going to work out well. As you said, this is a direct quote of Trump, Don the Con. The USA will be bigger and better than ever before! Explanation mark. No,
I like
well,
Don the Con. I think you got something there.
no, but it's like, nah, I want to go with Don the Corrupt because this is all for his rich friends and himself. And we can get into the crypto capture and every other corrupt thing the guy's doing. The Defense Department accepting the multi $400 million gift from of the plane from Qatar. All this is just, but it's like all this. There's never enough for him. There's never enough for them, and they don't really care who they roll over and harm. And like the Medicaid cuts are just a prime example of like, by the way, they said, I mean, to balance the budget, if you're going to do these massive tax cuts, you have to do more paid fors than cutting Medicaid. But, by a massive amount, you've got to do a hell of a lot more. So, go start looking at the noises they're making about Social Security and Medicare, looking at them, looking at reform. All this stuff is just setting up for they're going to have to cut more than they've already put out. They're just not going to. Obviously, it's been enough if the MAGA murder budget has to talk about Medicaid cuts, if they start having to defend the Social Security and Medicare cuts that they're aiming to do as well, that's what we have to do. We have to make sure people understand that this is not cool. Everything is not going to work out well. And the USA is not going to be bigger and better than ever before. And if you live near a rural hospital and it's the only healthcare provider within 100 miles of you, it's not going to be better that it's not there anymore because a tax cut got given to Elon Musk and Trump's buddies.
Just a note to everybody who's subscribed since our last live, we are going to start doing those on Fridays at noon pretty regularly and probably try to add a few more. We have gotten a ton of questions. We have a huge backlog. I know we do this a couple times a year. Joe, I promise we will get to some of these questions next time, but we were on a roll today, and that's just about all the time we've got.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for listening to that Trippi show. We will be doing our lives, and I think we get to a lot more questions doing our live sessions. So I hope you'll check those out. Maybe there's a way to do a link to the Substack so people know where to find us, Alex. Says Us is live. It's a civil social network for real human beings. It's pro-democracy. I hope you'll join us at says.us or find us on Apple or the Android, Google app stores. This podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. So check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media, and that is where we do our lives. So please subscribe to That Trippi Show. Leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Tell others about us. And if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.